This is an ancient art form that's sacred.
Tattoos weren't that popular 10 years ago, but now it's across the board.
Most people who are drawn to tattooing are drawn to it for a reason.
It used to be if you were tattooed, you can't work in a bank. Now you can.
Right now, everybody wants like that tatted look.
Everyone's got them, from lawyers to doctors to models.
It's like humans and aliens.
If I had the time, I would be completely covered from the neck down. I had my first tattoo when I was 15.
When I was 12 years old.
I got it right when I was 18 years old.
14 years old, 17.
I was 26.
I got started in tattoo culture because of tattoo boys.
In the last 10 years, tattoos have bled onto our billboards and branded our teen idols. And it's taking the plain white t-shirt all the way to the bank. This is the story of modern dating.
Tattoos on a man. Masculine, sexy, that's what they're selling.
The tattooed man is desirable right now.
The hot tattooed bearded guy. They are the modern day pinup. I've worked in the hub of advertising and media for the last decade. I've watched the explosion of tattoos becoming more mainstream with great interest. And the timing of making this documentary comes at a point when tattooed men are at the zenith of the media spotlight. The rise of the celebrity male who are heavily tattooed has had a massive influence on filtering down into fashion and then into mainstream.
Before, tattoos were the bad boy or the outlaw or the outsider. And now you got like David Beckham,
Tom Hardy, Johnny Depp.
Justin Bieber is covered in tattoos, like a Disney radio star.
Adam Levine, Dwayne Johnson. How do you think they've affected the public's views of tattoo culture and tattooed men?
It's normalized it.
It's allowed this art form that before was on CD folk permeate the living rooms of mainstream America.
Like, they've showed the world that they can be comfortable within being themselves, no matter how you present yourself to somebody. Why? Because at the end of the day, it comes from here. You can't be a celebrity and just have tattoos and make tattoos poppin'. Those tattoos wouldn't be accepted if the people in the underground wouldn't have tattoos either. Because tattoos is not a trend, it's not just a thing, it's a lifestyle.
Do trends create culture? Or does culture create a trend?
Culture keeps moving, and it's because we keep thinking. Culture is a part of our consciousness, and so as people, we're constantly thinking, we're constantly growing. So of course, culture grows with us, and then we also shape culture.
And I found a collision between tattoo and fashion culture very appropriate of our time right now. I saw an odd trend that was arising over the last few years of male models who are heavily tattooed, and I wanted to document them. That series then expanded and seeped into the world of celebrity, entertainment, sports, athletes. To understand modern tattoo culture, we need to look back at how it began.
I am so excited that the New York Historical Society is exhibiting tattoos in their Tattooed New York exhibit. It not only delves into the history of tattooing, and New York has a very rich history of tattooing, but what's great about it is it kind of takes you on this journey from the past to contemporary tattooing today. Aristocracy at the turn of the century they were tattooed.
Winston Churchill's mother had a few tattoos.
European princes such as the Prince of Wales were actually the ones that brought tattooing into the aristocracy.
When they got tattooed, it was usually an ebb and a flow. There would be moments of popularity, much like today's celebrities might start a style.
It meant that you had money. Because you weren't getting tattoos in England, it meant that you had traveled the world and had gone to the Orient where they were doing tattoos.
And actually, it stopped being a couture thing to get with the aristocracy because Thomas Edison's electric pen was invented and it was accessible to the masses. And the men who were heavily tattooed usually fell into the classes of criminals or sailors.
Other people going to the Orient were sailors. And so they were getting tattoos and bringing them back. So there was a trend in England where at first it was just really rich people who had the means to travel. And then the sailors are just traveling as part of their job. We're also bringing it back. And they sort of sullied the name of tattooing.
You have like an elitist fascination with getting marked. And then the introduction of machine technology to tattooing, it expanded this sense of opportunity. I was a tattoo artist for many, many years. Then I started writing more and more about it, so maybe I'd call myself a tattoo historian, tattoo culturalist. I moved to New York in 1975, to the Bowery and maybe East 1st Street in 79. And at that point, the Bowery was still the Bowery. There were older gentlemen who were, quintessential Bowery gentlemen who were kind of down on their luck. They had tattoos, and they told me, like, hey kid, there's a huge history of tattooing in New York City going back to the turn of the century. And they kept telling me, you need to find these two guys, the Moskowitz brothers. When I first showed up, they said, who are you? And at that point, people were still ostracized for their tattoos. So if somebody came talking about tattoos, people were highly suspicious of you. The Moskowitz brothers had tattooed on the Bowery with their father at the turn of the century. And they tattooed until it was illegalized in 61.
Due to an outbreak of hepatitis B cases, tattooing in New York City was banned for nearly 40 years, from 1961 until 1997, further changing the public's perception on tattooing.
There was a legendary tattooer in Coney Island named Brooklyn Blackie, who had, after it was illegalized, basically packed up and left, and no one knew what happened to the man. So I got a phone call one day from somebody who said, McCabe, I just got Brooklyn Blackie's phone number. I'm like, really? And I was really scared because I was a young kid. And I called him up. Hi, my name's Mike McCabe. Yeah, he's like that. And I said, I'm working on this project. And he's like, oh, how did you get my number? He was living up in the Catskills. And I went up and I sat down with him, got his oral history. And I said, well, I found Brooklyn Blackie. And they'd be like, it was like you hit the brakes, like that. And they'd be like, what? And I'm like, yeah, well, if you found Blackie, then you got to be on the right thing here. And so, Coney Island Freddie talked to me, and then Philadelphia Eddie talked to me. But it was all based on Blackie's generosity instead of throwing me out the door. He's such a cool guy, man. Really, really good guy.
Back in those days, because there was no Instagram, there was no internet, there was no way to research artists and find out styles and genres and who does what the best. I mean, it literally was, you walked into a shop, you put your money down, and the artist generally picked something out of a book and slapped it on you.
I started tattooing in 80, 81, and this was pretty early when you still had to make all your, you could get your hands on some tattoo machines, but you had to mix up all your old inks, you had to make all your own needles and stuff.
I hated making needles, mixing inks. I didn't like the busy work parts that I had to learn. Now there's beautiful companies that do a wonderful job and hypoallergenically test the inks. There's no chance of me accidentally putting something terrible into it. However, back then it was kind of a prideful thing when you did all your own stuff and no one else could do it because you knew how. When I started, it was all coil machines. Nowadays, people are turning to rotary. I have to admit it's a little easier. I mean, I never did tattooing because it was easy. It's just not as much fun for me. So I'm gonna stick with coils probably until the very last second, until I can't do it anymore. The first shop I worked at in New York, it was really sketchy.
The experience back then was nerve-wracking. It was exciting. It was kind of counterculture. It was rebellious.
And yeah, if you decided to tattoo in New York City, you were working, quote, underground. So then the ambiance of underground, particularly working downtown, you know, at that point you had Max's Kansas City, CBGB's, the Mud Club, stuff like that. So tattooing became kind of a signature of downtown underground lifestyle. And then it became kind of sexy and, you know, fringy, and it took on a life of its own.
I was around a lot of really cool celebrities. I wasn't tattooing them, but they were just like friends with the owners and friends with the mob and friends with the Hells Angels and all the cool kids. We had like Johnny Depp and Kate Moss and Jim Jarmusch, Iggy Pop. Even though he doesn't get tattooed, he would just come by and hang out. So I was inundated with like a lot of really cool celebrities that I never would have got to hang out with otherwise.
Back in 1985 or 1986, when Jane's Addiction first started, there were very few tattoo shops in Los Angeles that we knew of, certainly in Hollywood. And just on a whim, one day, me and our bass player, Eric Avery, walked into a shop. It was Bob Roberts' Spotlight Tattoo, and decided to get tattooed. And that was the first time we ever thought about doing it, the first time we ever got tattooed. And we were really, back then, like some of the only people that we knew in a close circle that were tattooed.
Back then it was you got a tribal or you got to pick something off the wall. You didn't really know good quality versus bad. You got pretty much a shaky line.
We just kind of thought of the idea, like almost like, let's go to the beach or let's get tattooed. We'll go get tattooed.
Getting some tattoos as a kid kind of was like a way of just not standing out quite so much, maybe as a target, or maybe just not standing out so much.
Although we've taken leaps and bounds in tattoo culture being accepted and even celebrated in media and mainstream culture, there are still a lot of people who are judged for their tattoos.
Being heavily tattooed means a lot of different things to other people looking at me.
One time, I was passing a kid and his mom in the mall, and I saw him staring at me. He was like maybe 5 years old, and I'm like watching him just stare at me the whole way. And just as he passes me, he like turns to his mom and goes, "Mom, that was the ugliest man I've ever seen in my entire life."
Have you ever been mistreated by the general public that don't know you?
Always. Every day. Every day I walk down the street.
One of the ways for me to separate myself from what I saw going around me was to engage in this culture.
I really look at them as this beautiful armor.
I definitely used it as an armor. I think we mostly do, most of us, and I still do.
You know, it is changing your identity, and because of the stereotype, you know, people use tattoos to kind of flex their identity.
The distance that it created was something I wanted. I would notice that people would kind of stay away from me, like the tattooed freak, let's not talk to him. I loved that, and it kept people that I didn't want to engage with the f*** away from me.
Growing up in England, I was bullied heavily. People were already being mean to me and already judging me. So I was like, okay, fine. I'm gonna cut all my hair off and I'm gonna get a ton of piercings and I'm gonna cover my body in tattoos and f*** everyone.
When I got tattoos, it was to do that. Like, didn't work. That was my goal. I wanted to look tougher, you know?
Old ladies is grabbing their children because they scared of the way I look. But as soon as I talk to that old lady and be like, baby, you ain't gotta do that. They feel more comfortable, you feel what I'm saying? And I've always lived by, like, a closed mouth does not get fed. If you feel somebody's uncomfortable next to you, make them feel comfortable. Why? Because me, personally, I will never be happy until the man that's sitting next to me is happy. Your happiness is my happiness.
If you talk about tattoo culture today, if you're a tattooed person and you walk into a Starbucks, it's almost an invitation to be spoken to. I've been
Or grabbed. Yeah, we all
a
have.
number of times, physically touched by people, and I'm actually I'm actually reliving anger and rage right now at that because it's violating.
I've had a lot of people say to me, oh, why did you do that to your body? You're so pretty. Why would you do that?
I have this little tiny tattoo on my hand, which gives me the most trouble out of, and I'm working on a bodysuit, but this little thing, I see when I'm lecturing and I gesticulate a lot, like I can see people's eyes just like following the tattoo on my hand. So it's, you know, it takes away sometimes from what the bigger picture is.
Now that I have a hand tattoo, it opens up a conversation instantly. Everyone wants to talk about it, whether I'm getting my coffee or paying for something at the grocery store. It's a conversation piece. And I'm lucky that my hand tattoo is very delicate and it's very intricate and it's relatively fresh. So it is a beautiful tattoo and people want to grab my hand and look at it in more detail, and I'm used to that. But I get a lot of looks, I get a lot of judgment. What was the worst thing that anyone has ever said or written about you since you started getting tattoos?
Say you're never gonna be nothing. Your parents don't care about you.